Wavect, the Web3 software company that understands what you want.
Hi everyone, welcome at Wavect. Today with Richard Leitgeb and Tony Drummond, who are both the co-founders of Moonbound Consulting and Moonbound Mastermind. I'm really pleased to have both of you here. Thanks guys, really appreciate that you take the time out of your busy schedule. And today we will talk about tokenomics that can either break or make your project. So thanks guys, and starting out, I will drop, let's say, the mic to one or both of you to basically let us know whatever your passions are, what you're currently working on, and yeah, maybe to intro yourself if I forgot something you want to mention here.
Excellent. Go ahead. You can go first, Richard.
Yes, hi, I'm Richie. I'm the Vice President of Moonbound and the co-founder of the Moonbound Mastermind. I live in the heart of Europe, actually 20 meters away from Kevin. I'm his neighbor. And yeah, I'm quite excited to do this podcast today, as we're talking about a really pressing topic only a few people get right. And I have to admit, it can be quite confusing. So I'm pretty excited to talk about tokenomics for the next hour.
Excellent. And well, I'm just so happy to have Richard here with me. You know, my name is Tony. I run Moonbound Consulting. I'm also the co-founder of Moonbound Mastermind. And really, my background is I have spent about 20 years in traditional business. I just turned 41 last week. And I also have co-founded a project myself. It was called MicroPets. We scaled it from $550,000 to over 207 million in market cap. We had about 70,000 holders there and a massive community. And basically my company today and also in the mastermind, what we're really trying to do is take a lot of that learned experience. A lot of it was learned very painfully and help other people and guide them as they build their project in this space. And that's why we have the consulting company. That's also why we have the mastermind. Is really our vision is just to help people as best as we can. And the rest of it will largely take care of itself. And that's why we've been able to kind of grow as fast as we've been able to in this short span of time of less than a year. So we're very happy. And moonboundconsulting.com and moonboundmastermind.com are the two URLs that people can check out if they want to learn more. And thank you very much for having us here today, Kevin. We're excited to finally meet you. And I follow your content very closely on LinkedIn. It's awesome. And I'm also a developer as well, by the way.
Oh, really?
So,
okay.
Yes.
That's going to be exciting. Yeah, I will definitely, basically, for all the listeners today, I will also add all the links that Tony and Richard will mention today into the video description. So just for your reference. We heard now already quite a lot about tokenomics. So just to get everyone on the same page, what or how would you define tokenomics? What is it about? What's the, why is it a thing at all?
Yeah. So first of all, I was just having a conversation on LinkedIn with someone today about this, but tokenomics to me is the economics of the token itself. That's how the word is just as simply as put together. And what that really relates to is you're going to have this token, it's this asset, and it actually will have a value to it, right? It might go up, it might go down. Well, really, as you think about that token and how it's used in the context of your ecosystem, for example, how are people using it? Why are people using it? When are people using it? When they do transactions, what's the average potential transaction? Things like this are really important considerations. In addition, what you also have to look at is a lot of people are using the token for fundraising right now. And how does that impact the market cap and the valuations and potential selling pressure? And there's a lot of stuff out there that's unhealthy. And that to me is really like what I view as tokenomics, and also the most critical components is making sure that you're really building a healthy, sustainable economy with that token. So not just looking at it as something that you can just sell later on and just make a whole bunch of money off of, but actually using it to build a sustainable ecosystem. Because remember, you want to have holders that are going to be participating in that ecosystem later on. You want them to see the token as something of value, not just something to more speculate against, let's just say. That's how I view a lot of this. And that's really my mindset as I try and guide people as well.
That's pretty exciting because what we always see in bull markets, right, is exactly what you just described. People launch a token, right, especially smaller projects, obviously less serious projects or oftentimes even scams, launch a token, hold tons of them themselves. But yeah, at a later stage of the bull market, they are vested and everything. And then they pump it up and sell on them, right? So that's definitely not how it should be. Follow with you on that. Speaking of tokens and using them to raise funds, right? There are different approaches to launching a token, right? There's that big group of security tokens, which some people argue is basically everything.
It probably will be later.
And then there's the probably smaller group of actually utility tokens. How would you, or any one of you, differentiate them, and what makes them special? What's the use case for both of them, if they have one?
Yeah, when I personally, and maybe Richard, I'll ask you to touch on some thoughts on this too after this. But when I think about like a security token, that is like it's kind of linked to like an asset, like an actual security, right? That's how I think of that. Like it represents something a little bit different than, let's say, a utility token, where it's something to be used within the platform, the ecosystem. So those to me are two separate ways that I personally think about it. And I think from that definition, most of the tokens out there are in fact utility tokens. Okay. Now, the fact that speculators roll in does not, in my opinion, change the fact that now it goes from utility to more, let's call it more of a, a different type of a token, let's say. And that's how I personally look at it in my standpoint. So I personally view as like, what's the purpose of the token, how it's used in the ecosystem, and all that should derive what type of token it is, instead of some government entity or something like that, especially when the definitions aren't really that clear. Like to say that this is a security now, like even BUSD is now somehow freaking security. It's things like this. It's a stable coin. It doesn't even go up. It's not meant to go up in price at all. It's not the whole purpose of it. So I think, we're going to see more definitions. I think that's going to give us more clarity. But that to me, it's still a confusing area in the mindset of even the U.S. government here and how it works out. How I look at it again is the token something to be used actually in the platform, in the ecosystem, to gain some kind of a benefit, instead of just something that you maybe invest in? Like if I look at a real estate building or something like that, and the token represents an investment in that building, that to me is more of a security. That's how I would look at that, okay? Because it's not really the tokens being used for anything other than like an investment vehicle. So, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an attorney, that's just my personal viewpoint on it.
So
Exactly. I think to really simplify it, I had an easy time to just imagine a utility token is basically a product. So you buy a token for exchange of a service, might be later, might be already currently existing. A good comparison is, for example, all of you know these gym point cards. You go to a gym. If you don't want to subscribe monthly, you buy 10 points. You can go 10 times to the gym, but you cannot go to the grocery store and buy bananas with those points. So you only can exchange those points for a daily visit in the gym. That would be a perfect example of a utility token, just an exchange or like just a purchase of a product for exchanging it later. And the security token for me, it's just a typical, I buy a share, but not on the stock market. I buy directly from the company itself without all the legal issues for the buyer. Of course, the project has some legal frameworks set in place, but it's a quite easy process to invest in companies where you directly participate on the success of this company.
Really interesting take, and I'm 100% with you. Just one thing, should it always be a product by itself?
No, it can also be like voting rights, for example, if you talk about DAOs. But I think to visualize it in an easy way. So I'm always a big fan of explain me like I'm 5 approaches. And
Same.
This would be the approach I would use for the ELI5 method to just visualize it. But it doesn't have to be a product. It can be a service. It can be a voting right, in my opinion.
As I said, fully with you. One interesting aspect that I just got into my head when you said tokens are to be exchanged for the same value within your ecosystem, right? So if you buy these points or get these points for your gym membership, to exchange it later, right? It has an inherent value actually. So now it could be interesting or could be an issue at some point if these tokens can still be traded in some kind of way and people start to speculate with it, even if it's OTC, right? So not sure if you have an opinion on that. So I know it's a gray area. It's really just.
But it's coming back to the thing Tony mentioned, because let's say it's a very exclusive gym and it only lets in 100 members. So the first 100 members buying those 10-point cards now have an increased value because no one else is going to be accepted in that gym. So the intrinsic value is going to rise. It's quite interesting train of thought here, yeah.
Yeah.
If it then would be considered, yeah.
Obviously, we won't make many friends here, as Tony already started with it, calling BUSD as security. I hope you don't have a Binance account anymore or something like that.
I swapped out of it. I didn't call it a security. The SEC somehow did. It doesn't pass the Howey test anymore.
Okay. So you just repeated for protocol.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was actually holding that and I had to swap out of it. Yep. Okay. Then I went to USDC. We know what just happened there.
Awesome. Gotcha. Okay. Talking about utility tokens and security tokens in general, what we see, especially in bull markets, right? Many Web2 companies or just companies that are not involved with crypto, blockchain, or whatever, are interested or ask me, myself, I'm sure both of you as well, hey, I want to launch a token, I want to launch an NFT, whatever is currently the hype, right? How do you think in the current market and beyond that, tokens will be relevant for regular companies that are not crypto native?
That's a great question. And one approach I always try and take, Kevin, is really to understand why they want a token in the first place. Okay, for example, if it's just to make money, well, that's not a value proposition. Okay, I hate to say it, but it's not a value proposition. The value of a token to me, should be something that should be prevalent and kind of woven throughout that business. So, for example, I'll give you a great example. So there's a company called Metric, okay, and it's METRC, and they have like cannabis tracking, okay. For example, you need to track the plant from seed to sale. Now, for example, let's say they had a token now, and that token enabled people to actually become part of their ecosystem. You'll have access to a platform, be able to have access to the on-chain seed to sale tracking that would have the decentralized data that any platform participant can access. And yourself as a developer as well, the value of having that data, not having it stored within some centralized entity that can manipulate the data. So it's things like this that I personally view as like a good solution. I know one client right now is actually building just that type of a solution with that seed to sale, with medical cards and things of that nature. And yes, they'll also have ways to drive revenue for their business. But when I think about it, the token itself should be something that should have a Web3 component to it. And that's why it's being designed, and why it's going to be used is because the participants will have something of value in relation to that business, instead of just, let me just launch a token so I can sell it later on and make some money off of it, or an NFT so I can sell it later on. For example, if that plant were an NFT, right? We know NFTs are just tokens, basically related to a smart contract, really. But anyway, if that NFT were a token that had a unique ID that could be tracked, and that plant was, well, then we'd be able to see where that plant was throughout the entire supply chain, and how that NFT was even consumed, or even maybe even used throughout the different providers that are going to manufacture a given product. For example, a gummy, you're going to follow through multiple different processes to actually create that. So it's the same exact thing. And also, myself as one who used to be a manufacturing consultant, when I look at the safety criteria, when I look at how was that plant actually, in all those suppliers, did they follow good manufacturing practices, GMP, are they actually building in a food safe manner? Do they have that certificate? Is that on chain? There's numerous questions I could ask that could actually relate a token and blockchain technology to actually drive value for the participants. Okay. And all that right now is what I just explained is primarily in some centralized database in these individual platforms. That's not very good from an interoperability standpoint either. So that's sort of like my perspective as I think about real business and tokens and NFTs and actually leveraging blockchain for driving value for the consumers. So,
listening to that, I'm thinking about what actually, because I'm highly skeptical about utility tokens sometimes, because 99% a centralized solution is better for an closed ecosystem, for an actual utility token. Not a utility token in terms of we launch a security and then back utility on top of it to comply. But actual utility tokens, how would you two, or maybe if you want Richard to have some fluctuation here, how would you two differentiate or consider or just think what makes an actual utility token worthwhile to build instead of a centralized solution?
I think it comes down to transparent traceability. For example, I totally agree with what you said. Most companies just force some utility, in most of the cases useless, or could be done better with a centralized solution just to be compliant. And in the end, it all comes down to basically raising funds. For me, it's nothing else than crowdfunding, or the same like an IPO in a more easy way, because you don't have all the legal restrictions if you manage to put an utility on it. But really dedicated use cases for a utility token where it would make sense, it's pretty hard to find, in my opinion. And I'm working with one manufacturer in the space who found some value in it's basically security related, but combining physical security products with the option to trace all the openings, closings, etc. It's for the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, yes, there I can say it would, in theory, make sense, would also be manageable with a centralized database. But of course, it's not that fancy. It's not blockchain. And yeah, management cannot be proud of implementing blockchain technology. I think it's really a lot of hype still in the space. And I wish that more companies are just honest and say, in my opinion, it makes sense if you don't find a real utility for a utility token itself, just call it fundraising. And in addition, if you have a leverage effect by building up a community, then you profit double. For example, some lifestyle brands in the NFT world who not only profit from raising funds in a quite easy way, but also building a community which they can leverage for other areas. But they should be honest about it. It's a security token. We want to raise funds. And therefore, we have to go through all the legal troubles coming with it. And I mean, it's just sounding complicated. It's not different from going to an IPO. Actually, it's not that much different. Paying a lawyer 30K, it's done. You have the prospect, you have everything. So it's just a matter of basically paying some good lawyers to implement all the compliance mechanisms. But it's not that complicated.
Interesting take. Fully with you. Tony, what would you add to that? Or is it a full answer?
Yeah. I just like to say that I'm a fan of decentralization, but I also view like we're really far away with it, because like if you have a truly decentralized ecosystem, then who's actually in control of it? I don't know. Like, like what happens if something goes wrong? Who actually is the one that's leading this and making the decisions? Like I always view like there should be, just like anything. It's like if you had a team with no leadership, how would that work? I don't know if it would work very well. You always need leadership. So you always need somebody to make decisions. You always need somebody to have skin in the game, right? And so like when I think about true decentralization, I'm not a huge believer yet because I haven't seen it work yet in practice successfully. But I am a person that very much loves the technology from a mindset of enhancing business and enhancing performance. Like I'll just give you an example. Let's say we had a token where it was a supply chain token and it enabled us to actually track, and actually anyone who held the token could actually participate in the data that would be actually tracked on this blockchain of some way, shape, or form. I'm not going to explain all the technicals, but let's say that also had a piece of equipment that was inside of a truck, okay? And that was a calibrated piece of equipment that would also make sure that the temperature of the truck didn't go below a certain temperature threshold. If you wanted access to that data, you had to hold the token, for example, okay? Maybe you had to consume the token to actually get access to that data. But let's say that truck goes below a temperature threshold, the material in there could be no good, okay? Now the material is no good in there. Let's say it's a coating. That coating's used in a product and it destroys everything. And yet, how does anyone relate to the fact that that coating went below that threshold? And that was the problem. Instead, you end up having a bunch of finger pointing at each other. So how I think about a token that could be utilized in this case is anyone who holds that token, you get access to all the data that's being constant. And this is more efficient, obviously, in the future with the blockchain and enabling less transaction costs. And this is into the future. But if you were someone who held that token to be able to access that data, that would dramatically reduce your risk. Because I've been part of claims in business that are many hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in printing, people are saying, oh, it's the ink, it's the paper, it's the coating. Nobody knows what caused the thing to fail. They're blaming the printing company when really all along it could have been the transportation company, right? And these are things that I'm getting at that could drive the real value for business. So for me, as I think about tokenomics, I think about all this stuff, I'm much more of a business mind in those regards, where I want to see tokens used to drive value and create value for business to solve real problems, whether it's through automation, whether it's through actually enabling trust, right? Like we have smart contracts now where you can actually see the rule sets on chain. You could actually verify all that. And you can see if it's a proxy contract, it can be changed later on too. You know, it's things like this that I even see a token with a freaking proxy contract in it. That's no good. You know, it's things like this. Yeah, it's things like this that we're able to see transparently that enable us to have that trust that I view as beneficial in business. Like even if Domino's said, hey, we'll deliver your pizza within 30 minutes or else it's free. Well, what if there was a GPS tracker in that car where after you paid for it, that started the timer? If it's not at your home by that point in time, you automatically get your money back, or you can claim it back through the smart contract. You know, instead of having to call customer service and say, hey, it's not in time. Yes, it was, and have that back and forth. You automatically get it back, right? And so there's many, many use cases I see with this technology, but I'm very much a fan of the technology as I explain it, instead of more the speculative type tokens and things of that nature. I really very much want to see this technology transform business, and I think that'll be the major catalyst to help us all rise from where we are right now. I believe we're just getting started. Let's just say that.
Love it. Yeah, looking at the history of blockchain, right, and all these hype cycles, I think what's really well observable is that most companies and people oftentimes forget why blockchain exists. That's something that I think is highly neglected in the market, right? As you perfectly said, it's about when two or more different parties either don't fully trust each other but need to engage with each other, if something needs to be traced in some kind of way, if interoperability maybe is some kind of use case, but in the end could be achieved with centralized solutions as well. We have that. It's called APIs, right? Interfaces, yes. And all that kind of stuff. So that's for me always like, okay, it's standardized, but it's still more expensive to hire a Web3 developer than a Web2 dev. So, but yeah, great points. Fully with both of you. That's great to hear that I'm, completely thinking different than two tokenomics experts. Let's put it that way. Thinking about all that kind of stuff, right? Tokenomics and tokens and securities, utilities. What we see is a lot of projects failing because of their tokenomics, or at least that's my impression of the market. What would you guys say is the most common mistake most founders make when setting up the tokenomics?
Okay, there's going to be many of those, but I'll try and summarize it as easily as I can. Now, one thing I also want to say is the reason why I'm so passionate about tokenomics is because I've had my own challenges with it, right? And I said, you know what? I'm not an idiot. I'm a smart guy. You know, what can I go back on? What can I learn? How can I help people that might be making some of the same challenges might facing some of the same challenges I did, right? If I could help protect other people. And really, I'll lay out a huge one. Okay, a huge one is selling too many tokens to private or seed. Okay, for example, you see this all the time. You see 15-20% to private and seed. Well, that leaves 80% left for the whole rest of the project. Okay, now once you talk about public, what's their allocation? Okay, let's say that's 20%. Now you only have 60% left. Well, now you need tokens for DEX liquidity. How much are you going to contribute there? And a lot of people try and cheat that way down. Okay, so let's say they have 20% to the public, all right? They'll even try and cheat it down to 10% for DEX liquidity. That's your volatility. So the lower that DEX liquidity number goes, the more volatile you're going to be. I don't care if you're on Uniswap version 2, Uniswap version 3 with that liquidity pool. So version 3 has that concentrated liquidity, which is going to enable it at different price levels to have less volatility. However, it's still the fact remains that if you have people that hold, let's say 20% of your supply, your project goes up to $100 million, that's $20 million of tokens they hold. You say, oh, Tony, we vested them for 4 years. Okay, that's $5 million they'll receive after the first cliff. If that liquidity pool doesn't have $5 million in it, they could strip all of that away. You'll be at zero. Okay. And that's the key lesson that I see so many people missing. Also, they try and raise all that money through selling tokens. Well, what that is doing is that's driving up the fully diluted market cap. For example, if I want to raise $5 million, okay, and I say, you know what, let's take our token and let's be at a $50 million fully diluted market cap so we can sell 10%. That's huge. Now we say that market cap's way too high, right? We can't launch at that. Let's bring it down to 25 million. Now we're selling 20% of our supply to private and seed. See how the problem still remains. And that whole mindset is a thing to be solved for. And what I would encourage people to do differently is think about a more traditional business where you could actually generate revenue. You have a token as well as part of your ecosystem. But as such, now you can actually sell equity in your business. Why? Because you actually have revenues, okay? And the other way around is I see a lot of people just selling tokens to get revenues, okay? So you're asking people to invest so they can get tokens, and the only way that you get revenue is to sell those tokens. That to me doesn't sound like a very good value proposition. It's like, yeah, invest in my stock so I could sell it later, right? That's what I want to do, right? It doesn't, like, if you think about what I just said, it doesn't make any logical sense, yet it's done all the time. And the reason why it's so enticing for people is it's an easy way to raise money, but it's also enticing for the VCs because after that first unlock happens, that cliff, that's many millions of dollars that could be liquidated, right? And it all is a vicious cycle. And that to me is it's like a huge dichotomy of what's happening right now in the tokens and fundraising and everything else. And that's why I do the content I do on LinkedIn, is try and bring light to some of these issues and show people what they can do instead, as I just described. So that's sort of like the big pitfalls that I see, in addition to one last one, which is really they have this own false reality that everyone will want to use this token, okay? They won't want to use the token that way. For example, if you're going to pay people in your token, people want dollars. They don't want your token, okay? They want dollars. So unless they're going to be using it on the platform, pay them in dollars, right? So I feel like oftentimes the false reality exists of this token and everyone's going to want it, and it's all a false reality. Really, it's not a good product. It doesn't have right utilities. It's not going to go anywhere. And for that reason, it's not going to be successful. So these are the things that I personally like openly kind of criticize with my clients as well, so that we can get the best result for them. And it's okay if the tokens aren't, if the utilities aren't perfect. We can figure out some utilities to make it a valuable thing for holders, as long as the base idea actually makes sense. So that's some things I wanted to share with the listeners here that they can be mindful of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just outside from the technical perspective, we also see quite an interesting approach most founders have, because they just don't want to deal too much with the tokenomics. They want to execute, they want to create the vision, the mission, build the team. Tokenomics is just a little, we just copy this template here, or we hire some tokenomics consultant on Upwork or Fiverr. We saw this so many times, and it's just very, very dangerous, because you're putting the success of your project in your hand. You can have the best idea, best vision, best team. If your tokenomics sucks, your token will not succeed in this market. So it's quite interesting what approach some founders are taking.
One more thing I want to share real quick, Kevin, is So there was a gentleman that approached me and he had spent $40,000 on his tokenomics, okay, through all these different consultants and advisors trying to get it right. Okay, so here's what I did. I looked at that. I said, wow, this is still a disaster. I removed the logo. I took the page in the pitch deck out of the PDF. I stripped that page out and I positioned it in front of my mastermind community. These are people that we just trained for about, I don't know, maybe an hour or two talking about tokenomics. They tore the whole thing to shreds. They tore it to pieces. They found all the problems with it. Richard was right there. He saw it too. They literally destroyed this whole thing. And the gentleman had gone through $40,000, and yet complete amateurs with just 2 hours of training and what to look for were able to find the problems. So that's another mistake is people hire like these economic experts. They hire people who have degrees in chemical engineering. They don't know anything about this stuff. You know, I'm a smart guy as well. I'm not trying to be arrogant, but I missed a lot of stuff, okay? And it's not about your intelligence. It's about knowing what to do, okay? It's about knowing what to do. So, and you can see this gentleman here, if people can see it, this is Dr. Deming. He has a great quote. It's not a matter of doing your best. It's knowing what to do and then doing your best. Okay, that's how it works out. The same thing is true with tokenomics, all right?
Exactly. And also one big issue, which is quite an important advice, is you as a founder have to put it in your hands. We see some founders going to an incubator, to an accelerator, even to VCs. And I don't want to discredit any one of these, but of course they are not doing this for free. They are working for their own pockets as well. So the founder fully trusts a VC to help them with tokenomics. Somehow the allocation goes a bit, is sliced up a bit different, or if you let a marketing agency put up the tokenomics for you, it's the worst thing you can do, because somehow the advisor allocation goes up a bit. And, like, it's your job as a founder to make sure those tokenomics work and not trust anyone who has a monetary incentive in your tokenomics. That's very important to have a neutral person helping you, or
A lot of things that really interesting, by the way. A lot of things that you both just said remind me of 2021 and these so-called pumpamentals. Not sure if you have heard. You have heard that? So, okay. Usually coming from, I would say, consultants that have not that much experience. I don't want to, let's say, put the label on everyone here, right? But it tends to be those consultants maybe that ripped off your client for 40K or something like that, or just don't have an idea, right?
Yeah. Sorry, the dogs are barking a little bit, but it's been about, it was basically he went through about 4 different companies from what I saw, and then he ran out of money. And that was it. And so really this is what I see as a mistake, is it's just believing people that they can do it. And really what I would encourage people to do is actually educate themselves. Okay, that's a huge one, is just educate yourself in tokenomics so you can learn. And then you'll know if some people are also full of it a little bit. Like, you know, that to me is a huge one for anything in this space. Like, Kevin, you see it all the time. People hire developers and they don't know what they're doing. Like, your company is very legitimate. I can tell the content you're producing, you know what you're talking about. Right. And so what I get at is a lot of people get wrapped up with these shady developers as well, and they also lose everything. That's the same exact thing in tokenomics, because all somebody needs to do is have just a little bit more knowledge than you, and then they can sell you. And that is the risk that you take. So if you increase your knowledge, the ability for them to do that becomes much more challenging. Like, if someone tells me I'm a good developer, I've been programming for this many years or whatever, I could start asking questions. You know, I've written RESTful APIs, so I could start asking questions about how they would build things, how, if they're using test-driven development, for example, how are they actually making sure that the quality is there? How are they planning out their day? Send me a development schedule so I could actually see the plan that you're going to build this at, and I can check that and make sure it makes logical sense. What tools are you recommending? What architecture are you recommending I should be on? You know, all these things give a lot of insights into the competence of the people. It's no different in tokenomics. So anytime you can educate yourself so you can better position yourself to ask the right questions and take those questions and understand if they're really telling the truth or not. Very careful, very critical in this space. There's so many scammers out there. It's unbelievable. And I feel like maybe about 25% of the people out there actually know what they're talking about. And that might even be pretty generous from what I've seen, because a lot of them came for the money. right? They did not come to actually build a legitimate business or actually leverage legitimate experience. They came in for the money, and as such, they don't have much experience. And all they
Now
have to
in
do,
the
like I
current
said, is be a
market.
little bit higher.
We notice this quite often because we only accept members after they are doing an application, and around 50% you immediately know. It's just about, oh, I heard here we can grab some quick money. Those people are not going to succeed. Even if they make money, those people will not succeed long term in life. And we can really tell that, yeah, about 50% of them are just doing it for the cause, and the other one are really trying to also live the spirit of decentralization and also the original ideas why we have started this.
I would say that's a good thing about bear markets, right? People ask for references, people ask for social proof and past projects and everything, right? So, as you said, Tony, it's every part of the industry, from security auditors, which just send you automatic analysis with some tool that just outputs some, let's say, analysis if your smart contract is secure or not, charge you 4K and you know, stuff like that.
You don't know any
So
better. Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. But that's a good part about the bear market. If there are any good parts, that's probably one of them. And yeah, one thing that I'm personally interested in, because I don't know better myself, is our tokenomics. For sure they're different, right? Otherwise it's just copy paste. But are they like fundamentally from a structural perspective completely different company per company, or are there usually more similarities in terms of structure, not the amount of percentage but structure, or is it let's say less comparable project by project?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kevin. And there's a lot of similarities I see, like when we don't talk about not just the percentages, but also the, let's say the allocations, like you need a treasury, you need development, you need marketing, right? That's very much standardized throughout a lot of projects I see. And once in a while, you'll have like a unique use case where you might need some, let's say some platform incentives or staking. Staking is less common now, I see, because of the rules that are coming out with that as well, right? But all that seems to be generally very much the same. Now, where it's different is also in the upfront utilities. That's also, so what you see in the end point of the tokenomics is these allocations. To me, that's the final piece. For me to get to that point, there's a lot of work I do in the front end. So for example, I'm going to map out all the utilities in detail in my maps, process maps. I'm going to understand how it's used throughout the ecosystem. So to me, that's a critical part that is not standardized throughout each project, and it should be different for each project. Otherwise, it's just another copy and paste, right? Like this platform and how it drives its value for its holders is going to be different than this other platform and how it drives its value for its holders, right? And so for me, it's a matter of figuring all that out, mapping it all out, understanding it to make sure that is there an actual value proposition for the token? Is there a use case for it that people actually want to use frequently, right? To ensure that we have velocity of the token being used. You know, these are things that are really important. And what I've taken as another step is I actually simulate all this using a tool called Machinations to actually build out a complete diagram so they can actually watch the tokens and watch. I can actually show tokens and fiat and everything. I can model a complete economy using this tool. Then we're able to see how much is actually being used. If we say we're going to have 1,000 users and 10% are going to use this much per month, we can actually see the output of that, right? And so things like this are all the tools that I will use up front to produce that standardized output that you actually see. So that output, what that also relates to is also looking at, if we say we're going to have this much for development, it's going to have this much vesting in cliff. Well, we have to also look at maybe the potential market cap that it might be at, the token might be at, because if we think we're going to have, let's say $500,000 for development, you know, in a year or whatever, and we say, great, you're going to have that. But what if your market cap goes down? Then you have about 50,000 maybe. All right, now you're vesting that. I have no money, right? And so that's why I also encourage people, make sure you're generating fiat with what you're doing. Make sure that you actually have a business model for what you're doing. Make sure you have revenue for what you're doing, because you don't want to count on just that allocation to sell later. Even in a bear market, as we talked about, when you have those cycles, when you're going down in price, and those tokens unlock, I've been in the seat before where you look at your chart and you're working day and night to bring it back up to help your holders. And it becomes almost like an obsession to try and get it, okay, to try and get it to turn around. And it's really challenging. It's really challenging to right a ship in a bear market. And now you're telling me you're going to look at those tokens that unlock and you're going to sell them into that chart. You're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. I could tell you, it's, at least if you have any form of ethics, you won't do it, because people will see that sell. They will complain that the team is selling on them. That will not be good, because again, all this stuff is traceable. And anyway, these are things like that that I think people aren't aware of later on. And that's why, again, good business model. Use the token for what it's supposed to be used for, to generate the value for the intended holders on the platform. But that's sort of my speech, if you will, on sort of the standardization that you kind of see off the front end, the back end, and how all this stuff I do in the front end kind of leads into that, because it all looks very much the same. Like Richard said, you also don't want to copy and paste, because you'll be copying and pasting someone else's mistakes. Okay, as well. It's like you don't want to just take decisions and run down the hall. In a sense, it's very dangerous, you know. So hopefully that answers your question, my friend.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks for that, Richard. I'm not sure if you have to add something to that. If so, feel free to.
No, in this case, not. It was perfectly explained from Tony.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I just have one last question for this awesome session. Thanks, guys, again. When people are starting a new project, let's forget about a second about the bear market, because I personally wouldn't launch a token project right now that's publicly traded, but happy to have feedback on that as well. What 3 major steps would you take for a project that wants to start out with tokenomics themselves and hopefully later go to experts like yours? But how should they start out?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And let me touch on something else you said of not launching in a bear market. I'm fully in agreement with that.
Okay.
And also, I feel like a thing that people aren't understanding is, let's say your liquidity pair. I mean, now having a stable coin as your liquidity pair can be dangerous, as we just saw with USDC, as we saw with BUSD. So what's left? USDT? You know, we've heard the concerns about that as well. So now your liquidity pair might be ETH, let's say, right? Well, if that's the liquidity pair of your token, that goes down in value, it brings your price down with it. Okay, so that's the part that a lot of people don't get, is those are linked. In other words, if I have $100,000 worth of ETH, I have $100,000 worth of my token in liquidity pool. When ETH goes down, let's say 20% down to 80,000, the token value goes down as well. Just like that's called impermanent loss. You know, things like this are things that you can look up in case people are interested. Now, when it comes to the first 3 steps, here's what I would do. Number 1 is I would go out and hunt down. There's a Tokenomics DAO out there, actually, that I believe is the name of it. They have a great newsletter with a lot of resources. So I would actually search out the more legitimate sources that's also out there. And there's also like a Notion link that I could even give you later that has a bunch of different threads and resources for people too. But I'm very much let's seek out the people that aren't like, yeah, this is going 1000x. Let's seek out the people of reason, and let's spend time on YouTube. Let's learn about what a liquidity pool is. Let's look up how does the price of a token change, okay? And learn about those fundamentals, because that's going to be the value of the token later, okay? It's going to be traded on the decentralized exchange. It's also going to be traded on the centralized exchange in all likelihood. But if you don't understand the value of how that's being derived, for example, if you have only 1% in the DEX liquidity pool versus 10% in the DEX liquidity pool, what does that do for volatility? Okay, so it's about learning about these details that I view as key. So that's step number 1, is you want to really understand liquidity pools, how they work, how the token gets its value, how the token changes in value. A formula you can look up is called the constant product formula. It's as simple as X times Y equals K. Okay, that's a simple way that you can look up on how that token will get its value. There's plenty of YouTube videos out there that people can look up as well. So now once you've understood that, now what you're going to do is you're going to design your tokens, your ecosystem, and your utilities for your token. You're going to figure out how will people use it? Why will people use it? For example, if we have, like I mentioned earlier, the seed to sale tracking, is that something that they will spend to get access to that seed to sale tracking, right? They will actually use the token to access that. So we need to think through the utilities. We also need to, as another step with that, is to validate with the target audience and with the target avatars that we expect to use the platform, that this is actually going to relieve their pain points. Okay, so if we can identify those pain points, we can link the token to resolving those pain points and also make sure that it actually has a real proper Web3 use case. Let's say it's not just something that we're doing a token to do a token, it actually has value to them. Okay, that's also the next step. Now, so once you're at this point, you not only understand the value of your token, how it changes and how it's derived, but you also understand through the own voice of the customer, let's say, the VOC, how the token will be used and actually why they would be interested in using it to validate that. And after you do that, then you should approach your actual tokenomics allocations and your modeling and things like that to say, all right, here's how much we would be willing to sell to private. Here's how much equity we would be willing to sell in our business, and actually kind of break out those fundamentals. And then what I would do as a final step is I would actually get feedback. Okay, there's a lot of people out there that post tokenomics content like myself. If someone sends me something and says, all right, can you help me with my tokenomics? What do you think of this, Tony? I don't charge them for that. I'll come back and I'll say, hey, just right away, if I have to do in-depth analysis, I will of course charge for that. But if I just look at something and I can just give them a quick overview, that's also something that I do. And yet hardly anybody does it. Why? So I would encourage people just to network, engage with people who are tokenomics experts in the field, get their advice, get their feedback. And, again, this space is quickly revolving and changing. So maybe expert is not the right term. I don't consider myself an expert either, because, tomorrow might be a whole different set of variables that I have to learn, right? So again, that's just something to be mindful of, is who are the people who are sharing legitimate content on various platforms. Those are the people you could seek out and actually show them what you have. And they will very much, I would encourage you, they will probably welcome the response. They will like the message and kind of respond back. At least that's what I do. So that's the 3 simple steps I would encourage them to take. All right.
Maybe one step which I would add as well, because I totally agree with what Tony said, but also one thing that helped me back then when I worked together with Tony on my tokenomics, it's the fact that you have to plan out your budget very, very detailed, because you have exactly to know how much you are going to raise, also which employees, especially the key positions, you want to hire to determine the allocation of team tokens, etc. And unfortunately, we saw many founders like, with 2 millions, I will have a good runway without knowing anything. If you go to a VC with a mindset like this, it will not work. You have to know exactly your budget. Once you are finished, you put 25% on top of it just to have enough margin, and then you have a more realistic budget to work with. That's also a very important point.
Great addition.
Sorry?
I said great addition to Richard.
Absolutely. So basically, know your business and know your data, right? So that's a great add. Thanks, both of you. And one thing that I just want to add to Tony's first point, because I thought about it in the midst of the podcast as well, is one red flag that I personally always encounter myself is if consultants still suggest low liquidity because it's more volatile, it's the best marketing. So that's one part of it. So thanks guys really for being here. Really thank you. I think that's a lot of alpha in this session. And yeah, as mentioned earlier, I will put all links into the video description and on my social posts. And yeah, if there is nothing else you want to let the people watching know, we'd say thanks, have a great day or evening, Tony. And see you soon.
Thank you so much for inviting us. It was a great session.
Absolutely. Yeah, pleasure being here, and hopefully people learned a few things about tokenomics, and very excited to finally get together and have a chat. So thank you very much for having us today, Kevin. Pleasure.
Likewise.
Wavect, the Web3 software company that understands what you want.